The 9 Rings of Power were magical rings given by Sauron to men to corrupt them in order to bring them under his control, eventually corrupting them into the Nazgul. But what happened to these rings? Let's find out.
Build me a throne worthy of Mordor.
So before we get started, it's important to note that this is one of those subjects that Tolkien wrote very little about. We have just as little information on these rings as we do on the Nazgul themselves. But there is enough info out there that we can use to piece together to figure out what happened to the rings themselves. So, the Rings of Power were 20 magical rings that were forged during the Second Age, made with the purpose of Sauron having a way to seduce the rulers of Middle-earth to evil. 19 of these 20 rings were forged by the elves in Eregion, led by Celebrimbor. These rings were divided into 3 groups, 3 for elves, 7 for dwarves, and 9 for men. I'm sure you know how it goes. One additional ring was then created for Sauron himself, by Sauron. The 19 other rings were somehow connected to the power of the One. Their wearers could be controlled by the wielder of the One. If you want to learn more about the elven or dwarven rings, or even Celebrimbor himself, let us know in the comments down below and we will be sure to prioritise some videos on them. But for now we are talking about the 9 that were given to men. So although never confirmed, it seems like the 9 Rings of Power that were given to men were pretty much the same as the 7 that the dwarves received. Even if they were different in appearance, they had pretty much the same effects. Sauron chose to give the 9 to men because he knew that they would be the easiest to corrupt. In time, the 9 wearers of these rings would fade into Nazgul, wraiths of great power that served Sauron and no longer had any will of their own. It's important to note that the fact that the 7 did not corrupt the dwarves is mainly because of the resilience of the dwarves, and nothing to do with the rings themselves. Were a man to wear one of the 7, he would likely still become a wraith. The 3 elven rings were completely different altogether, but that is due to them being created solely by Celebrimbor. Again, if you want to know more about those, let us know in the comments down below. So the effects of the 9 were that each wielder would acquire great power and great wealth and become powerful sorcerers. They were also granted a seemingly immortal life, something that men often wish for, as they were envious of the elves that would live forever. However, one by one, depending on the ability of the individual to resist evil, they would completely fall under Sauron's control, as I mentioned, having no will of their own. They also became completely invisible to everyone other than elves who had once dwelled in the Undying Lands, and Maya such as wizards and Sauron himself. They were all linked to Sauron. When his power was weak, the wraiths were also pretty powerless, and when he grew in strength, they became more powerful, to the point where their leader, the Witch King of Angmar, was presumably able to match Gandalf the White at his absolute peak. So what exactly happened to these rings? This is a much debated issue, as there are some contradicting statements within Tolkien's works regarding the matter, but I think we can clear this up. Most people seem to believe that the Nazgul wear their rings permanently, as this is how Sauron enslaves them. However, the only clear statement to back this up is when Gandalf states, "the 9 the Nazgul keep." Seems pretty definitive, right? Well, no, not really. Most evidence actually points to the fact that Sauron himself actually keeps the rings. In the Fellowship of the Ring, Gandalf explains to Frodo about the history of the ring and says, "So it is now, the 9 he had gathered to himself, the 7 also, or else they are destroyed, the 3 are hidden still." Galadriel also backs up this information when she says to Frodo, "You saw the eye of him that holds the 7 and the 9. And finally, we have the following passages from the Unfinished Tales that I believe fully secures this theory. At length he resolved that no other would serve him in this case but his mightiest servants, the Ringwraiths, who had no will but his own, being utterly subservient to the ring that had enslaved him, which Sauron held. They were by far the most powerful of his servants, and the most suitable for such a mission, since they were entirely enslaved to their 9 rings, which he now himself held." These statements very clearly tell us that Sauron and not the Nazgul were in possession of the rings. If you need any further convincing that the Nazgul never actually wore them, I will read you a sentence from the Letters of J.R.R. Tolkien, number 246. "They would have obeyed or feigned to obey any minor command of his that did not interfere with their errand, laid upon them by Sauron, who still, through their 9 rings, which he held, had primary control of their wills." So, to summarise, I think that after Sauron claimed the 9 rings, he gave them to the mortal men who then used the rings to gain power. In doing so, they poured their will and essentially their souls into these rings and became invisible wraiths. At this point, Sauron must have took back the rings and used them to control the wraiths and make them his most feared servants. I would then assume that with the destruction of the One Ring and the defeat of Sauron, the rings were also destroyed. My question for you guys today is this: would you like more of a backstory on the Nazgul, or do you enjoy this more mysterious side to them? Personally, I am hoping we get to see more of them in the Amazon Prime show. I actually have a theory that the main antagonist for Season 1 will be a man that towards the end of the season will be revealed to be a Nazgul in some kind of big twist. I only think this because it has been confirmed that Sauron will not be appearing in the first season, so we need some sort of villain. The Witch King would probably be my best bet. Okay, so time has come, as always, to thank our patrons and channel members. You guys are absolutely amazing. An extra special shout out goes to the members of our highest tiers: Gregory Nashith, John, Andrew, Denver Steel, and Pirate747. And we want to shout out our limited special tier on Patreon: Kevin, Abram, Matt, and Glorfindel of Gondolin. As members of this tier, you of course all get executive producer roles on our film and will be able to give feedback on the story itself during pre-production, which we are currently approaching the end of. We've been over the moon with the positive feedback to the script and we can't wait to get started with production. If you guys aren't aware, 100% of support on Patreon is going towards the budget of our short film, so if you want to support that film, that is how you can do so. Check us out on Patreon at The Broken Sword. A very quick reminder to check out our other channels, The Sixth Ranger and History of Dragon Ball, for some nostalgic Power Rangers and anime lore. The links will be in the description down below if they are of any interest to you. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you have a great day, and I will see you next time on The Broken Sword.